All right, welcome everyone. Please come on in, find a seat. I'm Mike Fisher, I'm the CTO at Etsy, and super excited to be hosting another Coders Craft. It's part of our culture to be a learning organization where we love to bring in people who can teach us stuff, and it's also part of our culture to share that with our community, and so that's why we're excited about it. This is my pitch for the evening that if you're interested in Etsy and learning more about it, find anybody in the black Coders Craft shirts. We'll be happy to talk to you. But on to the main event. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce Camille as our guest speaker tonight. So Camille Fournier, I've had the privilege of watching her lead and manage for a number of years, and I know that we're all going to be able to learn stuff from her. She is currently the managing director responsible for platform engineering at 2 Sigma. She was previously the chief technology officer at the Runway, and before that, vice president of technology at Goldman Sachs. She's the author of a widely popular book, The Manager's Path, a guide for tech leaders navigating growth and change, that I know many people have read and are super excited about. She's a prominent public speaker and writes the Ask the CTO column for O'Reilly Media. And tonight she's going to say a few words and then spend a lot of the time in Q&A. So get your questions ready. We have a mic set up here, and for all of our remote people that are watching online streaming, if you're an Etsy admin, we have an MC set up that you can ask questions. And so please join me in welcoming Camille Fournier.
Thank you. All right, let's see. Is this mic on? Oh yeah, okay, cool. I can hear myself. Cool. Yeah, so thank you for that warm welcome. I'm very happy to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, so thank you to all my friends for showing up to hear me say things you've probably heard me say before. I'm going to give a talk. It's going to be, I'm probably going to rush through it a little bit, but I hope that many of you have lots of questions for me about the book, about the talk, or about anything at all. But this talk is called Putting the Engineering in Engineering Management. A word from my sponsor. I do work for 2 Sigma. 2 Sigma is a financial company in New York City, in Manhattan. Our engineers and modelers harness data at tremendous scale using machine learning and distributed computing and other technologies to build powerful predictive models. If that sounds at all exciting to you, we are always hiring, so come work for me or co-work for Etsy. Etsy is also a great company to work for. Lots of good options here in New York, however you like it. All right, so I love to start my talks off with Cliff Moon quotes, because Cliff Moon is my funniest, most quotable friend, and now he is a technical advisor on Silicon Valley, which seems really appropriate. You either die an engineer or live long enough to see yourself become the business person. I reworded it slightly. And I like this quote a lot because it kind of summarizes the struggle that a lot of people who go into engineering management really face, that they feel like, they've stopped being an engineer and they've turned into this like business jerk. And I certainly felt that myself. So just a very brief kind of about me. As Mike said, I was the CTO at Rent the Runway, but I was a hands-on engineer for a really long time before I got into engineering management. I spent a long time working in big distributed systems. I have done a lot of open source work. And I really loved building code, doing architecture. In fact, when I started working with Mike at Rent the Runway, one of the jobs I held was chief architect at that time, and I really still love that stuff. But once I got into this management role and I became, I got in the right place at the right time at Rent the Runway, the company was growing, my role was growing, and I started getting into that dreaded cliff where it was like, I can't write code anymore. That I have too many people and too many things to worry about and too many balls in the air that it just doesn't make sense for me to write code. And this is kind of a common place for people who grow in management to reach, right? Where you reach that point. In fact, a lot of people love to talk about engineering management as a career change. You're no longer an engineer, you're a manager, and that's a totally different career. And I agree with that to some extent. I do think there are a lot of new things that happen when you become a manager that you have to learn. But I don't love the idea that managers are really not engineers anymore. And so, after I left Rent the Runway, having learned a lot in my time there, I decided to write a book about all the things that I learned. And part of this book revolves around a thesis that I have. And I have a thesis that management is a technical discipline. That I think there's a reason that we take people who are good at writing code and designing systems and sometimes make them into managers. Not always, but sometimes. Because I believe that engineering management is the intersection of engineering and management, that it is not just managing of engineers. It is not, simply the people things, although those are really important. But there's a big part of it that is also the art of guiding technical decisions. And if you are in a role of engineering management where you need to be guiding these technical decisions, you have to understand the context in which your teams are working. You have to understand the context in which those decisions are being made. And that is a technical process. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about 3 what I call engineering traits for managers. These are kind of overlapping traits that I think both good senior individual contributors as well as good engineering managers possess. And so I'm just going to run through these really quick. Debugging, empathy, and judgment. Let's start with debugging. This is the most obvious technical skill. Hopefully everyone here who writes code has learned how to debug to some degree of ability. I mean, it's pretty much like all of coding is like, I mistyped something, I forgot a semicolon, oh my God, this is space sensitive, like what's going on with this language? It's just all like debugging, easier and harder things. And this is one of the core skills of being a good engineer. I love debugging. It's actually one of my favorite things to do as an engineer. I still will do it from time to time. And I particularly love debugging really big, hairy, complex interacting systems. And in fact, I find that, engineers, as they grow up, some engineers, when they're faced with problems, they start asking why. And, that's how you debug, right? You start asking why. Why is this going wrong? Like, why does this system behave this way and that one behave this way? But some people keep going with the why. And they start asking things like, why are we solving this problem? And why do we have this process? And why can't we fix this? Why do we always have, a fire drill at the end of every sprint? Why? And, asking why too much is a good way to get stuck becoming a manager. Because at some point, someone might say, oh, you want to know why? Why don't you come in here and sit in this role? And you might have to figure out why and fix it. Some people describe this thinking about all these interactions as systems thinking, which I think is a good term for this. It's not my favorite term, but it's an accurate term for thinking about the interactions of many different systems, some of which you can maybe inspect, some of which are made of code, and you can actually debug them, dump their stack, whatever, figure out what's going on with them. And some of them are humans, and they're kind of black boxes, and you can't necessarily easily inspect them, but they are still an interacting part of your overall system. So, if you've ever been a distributed systems engineer, you know that one of the hardest problems to debug is the system is slow, because it's very hard to figure out which part of the system is slow. Is it the network? Is it this system? Is there back pressure or inadequate back pressure? Or what's going on? As a manager, the team is slow is the hardest problem you'll have to debug. And boy, will you have to debug it a lot of times, especially if you ever work at a startup. That is a classic question of all CTOs, VPs of engineering, and frankly down in startups is, why isn't it done yet? Why can't we ship this? Why is this so hard? Why? And the challenge with this, of course, is that it's very rarely a single cause that makes a team slow. So you are debugging a complex system, right? Problems can be organizational, they can be process related, they can be technical, they can be all 3. And so to debug these systems, you've got to start by looking at the people, right? People's interactions cause teams to behave well or poorly. When you've got someone on a team who is checked out or actively aggressive towards the other members of the team for whatever reason, that person can drag the whole team down, right? You can have, people that are just stressed out, they're not getting enough sleep, and they're acting out against their colleagues, right? That can cause your team to be slowed down because there's interpersonal issues. People won't talk to one another. They won't do code reviews for one another. This is a people problem. Of course, you can also have process problems, very commonly, right? Oh, the process is that product goes off, and they do these big ideation sessions, and they come to us with these beautiful ideas, and we feel completely not included. And this is really demotivating for me as an engineer. I want to understand why I'm building this stuff and not just get these specs handed to me by a product manager. That can be very demotivating to engineering teams, and that can slow teams down. Or just simply the process you have where you're just having to repeat yourself all the time. Oh, I already did a code review with this person, but I have to do one with this other person because we decided that was necessary. Processes can slow your team down. And of course, the technical systems can cause your team to not be able to do their work well, right? When you have a lot of technical debt, when you have a system that's really hard to figure out, when changing your system breaks 10 things that you didn't expect it to break, that will cause your engineers to not be able to get their job done quickly. Now, often it's the intersection of all three things, right? We don't prioritize bug fixes, so everyone's kept awake all the time because they're constantly getting paged. And we're keeping doing feature work, but everything keeps breaking, and everyone's stressed out, and they're all snapping at each other, and nothing's going well, right? And there's a lot of different things you're going to have to fix in order to fix that slow system. So this kind of ability to look through the different components of a complex system, in this case, the complex system of people, processes, and technology, is a critical aspect of debugging as a manager. And the challenge here, of course, is that unlike debugging as an engineer, so debugging as an engineer is really, really fun because when you figure it out and you get the fix and you put the fix out, you can be like, yes, do a victory lap. You ever do a victory lap? I do love to do victory laps. And it's like, it feels so satisfying to know that you fixed the problem. And you basically never get that as a manager. You never get that fast, oh, I fixed the problem and the team is awesome now. Like maybe 6 months later, you're like, oh, hey, you know, when we started prioritizing like bug fixes and now the team is like getting paid less and now they seem happier, that's great, but that's a long feedback cycle. It's very rarely you just fix it and it's done and you feel great, you get that dopamine hit and you move on. The one exception to this is, in my experience, if you have a toxic individual on your team, people don't like using the word toxic. If you have an aggressive jerk who is making everyone else on your team unhappy, actively unhappy, no matter how brilliant they are, and you have talked to them, you've given them many chances and they have not reformed, getting them off the team will almost certainly make such a fast difference in how well the team is performing, you will be surprised. I am always surprised by this because I always second guess myself. This person is so smart, they're so good, and yet every time I've made that change, it has been a night and day change in the team and the team's dynamics and the team's performance. So as to all the managers in the audience, don't second guess yourself. If you've really got someone who is causing behavioral issues for the whole team, doing something about that situation quickly is one of your very few quick feedback loops in management. Okay, so empathy. Empathy is a big, popular topic in tech right now, which I think is good, actually. We could use a lot more empathy, caring about other people, being able to put yourself into someone else's shoes. One of my best managers says that he has no empathy, he just fakes it all the time, which is fine. Actually, that's kind of what I do, too. And you know what? If you're able to, like, if you have the creativity and the imagination to fake what other people might be thinking, actually, I think that is kind of what empathy is, whether you're consciously doing it or not. And it's pretty important. It's important for engineers, right? You're writing code that other people are going to use. You're writing code that other people are going to read. That other person might be you in 6 months. Have some empathy for yourself in 6 months. So this is an important skill. And you know, the way that you kind of get this empathy for what it means to be an engineer is by writing code and by becoming really technical and doing it for a long time. And I think this is very important. I think this is important because people like to work for bosses that they believe are very competent. This is there at least is some studied evidence that having a competent boss is the most important characteristic to job satisfaction. Is more important than getting paid a lot of money, right? So it'd be better to go work for Mike Fisher, who I can promise you is a competent boss, than go work for some company where they're paying you $1 bajillion, but you're working for a bozo. This is what the studies say, and I think that's right. We want to work for people that we respect, that we believe appreciate the work that we're doing, that we believe have some kind of expertise in our area. I know this because I went to work for this guy. This is the CTO of 2 Sigma. His name's Alfred Spector. Alfred Spector ran Google Research for a long time. He's a fairly famous computer scientist. He's also a really good manager, which is a very, very unusual combination of skills. And that's great for me because I love both heavy tech things and I like management. And so working for someone that I respect across both those areas is extremely motivating for me. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that I expect to do pair programming with him or that you should necessarily expect to do pair programming with your boss or per programming, as the case may be. But that you're looking for someone who has a degree of empathy and appreciation, right? You want someone who can appreciate the details of what you're doing, of why it's hard, of what your job really is, of what makes your job, your job, right? Why do we pay these engineers so much money anyway? Like, it's not just because there's not enough of them. There's a lot of reasons. It's a hard job. There's a lot of hard things about it. And, you know, one of the major aspects of management is evaluation. As managers, we are called upon to evaluate people all the time. Even if you've got a company that has other processes for doing promotions and things like that, your manager's input is almost always very, very important. And so if you're going to be evaluated by someone, you really want it to be someone who you feel appreciates your work, who can actually fairly evaluate who's doing good work, who's writing good code, or who's producing good systems, from someone who just looks like they are. And maybe it looks like they're running around all the time, but it really isn't getting anything done. Beyond that, of course, a good manager understands what gets people excited, right? What they're into, what they're passionate about, and why. Understands that different engineers have kind of different passions, and actually to build a great team, you're going to build some people who love debugging, some people who love greenfield programming, some people who love talking to their product managers and customers, and all kinds of skill sets make up a good engineering team. And appreciating the kinds of things that make engineers excited, make them motivated about learning new things, you know, understanding the business, whatever. All of those things are necessary, and having actually done the job helps you appreciate those different skills. And then, of course, there's also the sympathy and the empathy for what your customers want. There's nothing more frustrating to me personally than engineering managers who spend no time thinking about the business or the product or the customers. I realize we have product managers, and product managers are wonderful, and I love working with them, but it can't just be owned. The caring about the customer or the business or whoever's using your software cannot be something that's only owned by your product managers. This is also something that's very important for all of you who want to be really senior engineers. It's really hard to build it's really hard to build something good if you don't know who you're building it for, because nothing is good in a vacuum. And then finally, of course, there is the empathy that is appreciating the frustrations. It is not obvious to a non-engineer which parts of a programmer's job are stressful. It's just not. If you've never done it, it's hard to be like, why do you care that you keep getting interrupted by this thing, or that, like, you know, this thing keeps failing? Like, just keep typing, right? All you just do is type, right? That's your job. What's stressful about that? It's not always obvious if you've never done it. So having a manager who has done it, who has the empathy, who appreciates what the job is pretty important. Now, the difference between the kind of empathy that you need to be a successful senior IC and the kind of empathy that you need to be a good manager is that I think as a senior IC, you can sort of spend a lot of your empathy points on caring about, you know, the code that you're writing in your team, and, you know, that your customers are getting the right thing. As a manager, you have to kind of balance it a lot, because you've got to actually care about a lot of different competing concerns. Frankly, you know, what this person cares about is going to be a little bit different than what that person cares about, and sometimes those things are in conflict, right? Sometimes the needs of what your product team needs to get built are a little bit in conflict with what's going to make your engineering team happy. And you can't always default to one group or the other. You have to be balancing all the time, adjusting between the health of the team, the health of the technology, the health of the business. And you try to make all of those things happy as much as possible. But sometimes you will have to trade things off, and you'll have to make hard decisions. And that actually brings us to our final area of focus, which is judgment. So hopefully technical judgment in a senior engineer is a pretty obvious thing. That's what we're looking for. Although I will say this industry is very bad at interviewing for technical judgment. We are very good at interviewing for technical knowledge. They go notation, data structure, Do you know this stuff? Which is great. That's useful. It's very measurable. But we're very bad at actually saying, you know all these things, but do you know how to apply them when? Do you know what, you know, do you have the judgment to take a very poorly articulated problem and turn it into a beautiful solution? And that's a hard thing to interview for, and I don't think we're doing a very good job of it. So that's a challenge to all of you to think about. But I think judgment is incredibly important in managers. I think technical judgment is incredibly important in managers, because even when you have great, you know, architects or, you know, tech leads or senior ICs that are giving you, you know, really good control of the technical details, the technical decisions, and even when you have great product managers who really understand the product roadmap, ultimately your job, I believe, as manager is holding all of those people accountable for those decisions to some extent. Certainly on the technical side, right? You need to make sure the decisions pass the smell test and make sure that all of the decisions, particularly on the technical side, have been balanced against the needs of the business. Because these impact the effectiveness of the team. In fact, all of these things impact the effectiveness of the team, right? The technical decisions, the people, and the product decisions are all going to make the team more or less effective. And if your job as a manager is owning that effectiveness, you need to be thinking about that. This is a new and somewhat unrefined concept. So I'm going to try to explain what I mean by no waterfall leadership. I think there is a somewhat popular idea right now out there that you can very easily and cleanly separate out. Manager owns people, tech lead owns tech, product manager owns product. And okay, they collaborate, but like they each have their very clear ownership of their very clear areas. And I personally worry that that turns into having the similar problems that waterfall project management has, right? Where you have these very clear stages and one person passes to the next, and you start to really lose the iteration of moving fast and getting things done. And again, I think that it's very hard for a manager to make sure that their teams are effective when they're divorced from the work and the technology that the teams are building and the teams are doing. So I am not personally a huge fan of let's keep our managers totally on the people side and away from the technology side, because I just think you end up, really losing track of one of the most important things that makes teams happy and effective. What else doesn't solve this? Well, process also doesn't solve this. Process is super useful. I'm actually not an anti-process person at all. Process is really good for exposing context that you need to make decisions. If you've got good processes, you're going to hear about things as they happen in the right way. You're going to get the right people in the room to do your retrospective or whatever. But process does not make decisions for you. You can't write a bot that runs your agile process and says, oh, this is what you should do next. That really doesn't work. Some decisions have to be made with the information and the context that you're getting from this process. So you need to have an eye for detail. You need to have a sense of judgment, right? You need to have a sense of judgment, particularly in the late stages of a project. So when you're getting close to shipping something new, when you're getting down to the wire, the engineering manager's job is to come in there and say, all right, have we prioritized the hell out of this? Because my tech lead has a list a mile long of stuff that absolutely must be done, or we're just, this is going to be a total pile of garbage that we're going to put in production, we're going to hate it. And the product manager has a list a mile long of the customers just must have all these features that my beautiful, beautiful drop-down menu has to be put in. And you want to get this thing shipped, and you realize that you can't say no to all the technical features and yes to all the product ones. And you can't say no to all the product ones and yes to all the technical ones. You've got to balance. You've got to prioritize. You've got to understand what's really missing. Get people to agree to what is really missing, what is really critical, and get people to agree to what's enough, what's good enough to get through this release. The other aspect of technical judgment and technical leadership here is really understanding the problems that the team is solving well enough to add value in conversations. And the way that this most often shows up when you're not doing it is when you do what I call manager telephone, which is where you're the manager of a team and you go over here to talk to, let's say, a product manager or a business person, and they ask you a bunch of questions about this thing that your team's working on, and you have no idea about any of the answers, so you write all the questions down, and then you go to the tech lead and you say, hey, can you tell me about A, B, C, D, E? And you write all their answers down, and you go back to the business, and you pass back those answers and get more questions and go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? You're playing telephone. All you're doing is, talking to someone, taking what they say, asking another person, and going back, vice versa. We want you as the manager to be able to answer some of those questions yourself and add value and rephrase them in a way that your engineers can understand and give you more information, right? Part of the reason we have managers and we have people that kind of sit in between teams and product teams sometimes, not in between is the wrong word, but who sometimes take the brunt of all those meetings, is so they can take the brunt of all those meetings so that the engineering teams aren't stuck coming into a bajillion meetings and spending all their days talking to people rather than writing code, right? If you want to be able to spend your time writing code, someone needs to kind of understand the work that you're doing well enough to explain it to someone else and answer their questions, right? So if you find yourself as a manager playing manager telephone, that's a sign that something is wrong. And sometimes the answer is you just need to put the two people together and let them talk to one another. And sometimes the answer is you need to really spend more time understanding what's going on with the team. Now, the challenge of technical judgment as a manager is that you have to be learning often without doing, especially as you become more and more senior. Certainly in my current job, I am not doing very much. I'm pretty worthless. I sit in a lot of meetings and talk to a lot of people and sometimes scroll on a whiteboard, but I'm definitely not writing a lot of code. And you start to lose your technical instincts when you stop doing it. It's really terrifying and hard. And so you have to figure out other ways to be forcing yourself to learn. And people do this in lots of different ways, right? Some people, occasionally write code on the weekends. Some people do a lot of readings. They come to talks. There's a lot of different ways to force yourself to learn, but you have to find creative ways to learn if you want to keep those technical skills sharp, that technical judgment sharp. All right, so debugging, empathy, judgment. These are my kind of three, just to give you a sense of some of the overlapping skills between engineers and managers. I had a slide in here that I'm debating what to do with, but one of the parts of my book, if you have read it, cool. If you haven't, that took me about 40 hours to write, and is the section that was the hardest and the most proud section probably for me for writing was the section of deciding whether to be an IC or a manager. And I don't actually make any decisions for anyone, but I try to lay out what the difference between what people think it should be like and what it is like for both of those jobs. Because I think often we have these idealized views of both the IC role and the management role, right? That the idealized view of the IC role is you write this code and you get to do all these new things and think these deep thoughts, and you don't have to talk to that many people, and people just respect you and they listen to you, and it's awesome, right? You're just thinking deep thoughts all the time and writing awesome code, and people respect you, and it's great. And in reality, that doesn't often work out that well. In fact, ICs, senior ICs, have to talk to people a lot, actually. Maybe not as much as managers, but they still have to share their ideas, and they don't always get to work on exactly the thing that they want to work on. But they have a lot more freedom with their time than managers do. Right? They have a lot more freedom, a lot more time to focus, a lot more time to go really deep on problems. If you love going really deep on problems and focusing and writing a lot of code, stay an IC for as long as you love doing that. That is my strongest advice to all of you. From a manager's perspective, people sometimes think that if you get to be a manager, you get to tell everyone what to do, and you're going to get a lot of respect, and the more people who report to you, the more respect you get. And in fact, it's kind of the opposite. Like, nobody has to respect you ever at all. And they will remind you of that all the time. I promise you. Like, maybe they won't do it to your face. Maybe they'll just subtweet you. That's okay. But nobody actually has to respect you. And frankly, you're managing engineers. They can all find another job somewhere else. And they will sometimes. And that will feel like a punch to the gut the first 20 times it happens. And it will happen at least 20 times. So you don't necessarily just get that respect because you became a manager. You don't get that authority, automatically because you became a manager. And you have to go through this painful process of, as you grow as a manager, you stop writing code and you're like, what am I doing with my life? I'm not getting anything done. All I do is talk all day and lose my voice, and I have nothing to show for it. Over time, you realize actually some people are listening to you, and you're coaching them, and you're able to have an impact on this culture, and you're able to guide some of the decisions, even if you don't actually get to make them all that much. But it's definitely not an easy path. Neither of those paths is, all roses and sunshine. My encouragement to all of you is, no matter what, stay hands-on for as long as you can, because staying hands-on and really getting that technical expertise is what is going to make your management career have the longest shelf life. Because once you start losing that technical judgment, once you start losing that sense of what it really means to be an engineer and getting really out of touch, your time in this industry could be limited. There is a risk, right? This industry is all about change. We're always having to learn all the time, and that can be hard to do if you don't have strong fundamentals. And you don't want to get out of touch, right? So the danger of believing that technical prowess is a really important thing in managers, and I always want to caution people, is that you can get a little bit full of yourself and think, oh, I was so good before I went hands off, and I'm still so awesome. I'm still like, if I just dusted off the keyboard, I would be like writing so much code so fast. Why is my team so slow? I could write this code, right? And you have to stay humble, right? It's very important to keep learning, to keep learning about things. And the thing I advise, especially more senior managers, to keep learning about advances in the way that engineers do their work, in software development practices, in software processes. Those are actually important things, right? The continuous integration, continuous delivery thing that Etsy kind of was one of the early pioneers of changed the way a lot of people thought about delivering software. And if you missed that as a manager and you never really figured out how to do that, you're kind of behind the times. That's a really important thing to know. Also staying in touch of, major fundamental movers in the way people work, right? The move to the cloud being another one. These are important things for you to stay in touch with as a manager, even if you are hands-off. So I hope to die an engineer, even though I may already be a business jerk. But I encourage all of you who decide to go whichever path to read more. This is my friend Mike, and he's a very cool guy. And you can start by reading my book. And with that, I am happy to take any questions. Maybe not on.
Maybe, I think it's on now. Okay, thank you for the talk. I've heard some advice from people that they suggest a lot of every IC should experience going into management so they understand kind of what's behind the curtain, and that your manager doesn't really know a lot more than you do. I was curious what your thoughts on that were, and whether you advise people to dabble in management, even if they're not particularly interested in becoming a manager.
Yes, my advice is that 9 times out of 10 I agree with that. I actually do think that if you are willing to go through a round of managing a few people, and a lot of companies have like tech lead manager roles, or they have sort of like not really like fully on the management path management roles that let people experience what it means to kind of have some responsibility for others. I think it is a very good experience for all engineers to go through. There are still a subset of the population that probably shouldn't. That they're just, if you really like find it very hard to read people, that you really don't like, having to do a lot of one-on-one conversations, if you're just really uninterested in caring at all about the people who work for you, like, we don't want human beings to be your guinea pig. So, it's great to like, if you are like willing to go in open-minded and be like, I'll try this management thing. I don't think I really want to do it, but I'm going to do the best job I can while I do it. Great. If you're doing it like, well, I just have to do this because Camille said I should do it, or somebody else said I should do it, and I really hate it, and I really don't care about people, and I really don't want to do it, please don't do it. That's bad, and you can still have a great career without ever having been a manager. Just make sure you get at least some project management experience in some kind of a tech lead role would be my advice there.
Hi, thanks for talking and for the book. One of the things I really liked about the book was that there was a step in between managing one team and managing managers, which is managing multiple teams. And as someone who has gone through that, I appreciated that you mentioned how difficult it was, and really it sucks, but it's necessary. I'm curious, there's this role that a lot of managers play, which is when you're a manager of one team, you can act as that kind of that eng manager tech lead position and be more hands-on, and then you expand a little bit and you're looking at 2 teams. When you're looking at those multiple teams, you probably have an engineer or an IC who's covering a lot of those responsibilities. Do you see those 2 types of teams? One where there's a hands-on manager who's a manager and tech lead type, and another team that's a manager with an IC filling those responsibilities, is operating fundamentally differently? Or is that just like, I'm also thinking about the next step where like, now you need someone to step into that manager role.
Yeah.
Like, do those teams operate differently?
Yeah, so I'm going to see if I can like phrase this question succinctly. So when you are when you go from managing a team where you are pretty hands-on, pretty common that if you're managing a team of, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5, even 5 people, you're probably still pretty hands-on, writing code, acting in a fairly tech-leady way. And then you get another team, and one of those teams maybe has a tech lead who's responsible for a lot of the techie decisions, because you can't really easily make the technical decisions across both of those teams. But you're the manager for all of those people, even though you're not the tech lead for one of the teams. Do those teams operate differently? They probably do, a little bit, in that you probably spend less of your attention on the team that has a tech lead than you do on the team where you were the expert and you've been hands-on and you've been kind of writing code in the team. And I think that the transition that you probably need to start making in that situation, as you're probably thinking about preparing to transition into managing managers potentially, or kind of trying out this larger leadership, is letting another person take on some more of the tech lead responsibilities for the team where you've been writing code, so that you can get up to speed on what the other team is doing, and that you can start acting a little bit more in the like manager, hopefully these two teams have something in common. It's hard to manage directly two teams of people that have absolutely nothing in common. So hopefully you're there trying to figure out what these two teams have in common, help joint goals for whatever your part of the organization is operate well. And you should be training up a tech lead for each area to help oversee at least the technical side of those areas so that you're a little bit less in the weeds in one area and neglecting the other.
So one of the questions I had was the schedules for a contributor and the schedules for manager are very different and have very different characteristics. And so I guess the question that I would ask is, what suggestions you might make for when you are spanning both of those in a way that balances both of those roles and also maintains a healthy work-life balance?
Yeah, so balancing when you're both managing some people and writing some code. I think that what my advice is trying to batch some of your meetings requirements so that you're not, getting thrashed in the middle of your focus time. Giving yourself chunks of focus time is pretty important. It doesn't always work, and in fact, certainly this is the point that most managers realize they can't be writing code is when they realize that they can't even guarantee they can give themselves 4 hours free and 1 day a week because there's just always something going to come up. So there's going to be a fire, there's going to be a meeting, there's going to be an interview, there's going to be something that's going to pull me out and force me to, just not be able to get that focus time. But for as long as you can, I think trying to batch up and give yourself focused blocks of time to do your IC work, and then have, other time where it's like, all right, I'm in manager mode now, right? I'm in one-on-ones mode today. I'm in, team meeting mode today. I think that's kind of the best approach that you can make. And then also just realizing that even your focus time, you may or may not be writing a ton of code in it. You may be starting to transition to things that are more easy to interrupt. So whether it's, debugging, code reviews, tooling that lives a little bit outside of like the mainline code branch for your teams. Sometimes you stay hands-on, but you stay hands-on in like a secondary way rather than really being a primary bottleneck for the team.
Hi, thanks for coming today. I'm a product manager, and I had a question around how you nurture creativity and if that differs across personality types or product group types. Just any tactics and advice you had there.
Nurturing creativity. Well, I'm not a product manager, so I'm not very good at that. I guess the only tricks I know about for nurturing creativity are the following. Giving people room to breathe is fairly important for nurturing creativity. Most people find it hard to be creative if they're just always fighting fires. And so, if you want your team to feel like they have creative freedom, you need to make sure that they have time to tinker, time to play, whether it's hack days or, whatever, right? That you haven't packed them so tight with delivery obligations that they don't have any time to think. I think asking people, I think the other thing that I have found that can work sometimes well for nurturing creativity is actually people are creative under constraints as well. So being clear about like what the constraints of solving the problem look like, but that there's a lot of freedom within those constraints to solve the problem. I think that's another important area for, you want to be like it is not necessarily going to nurture creativity to be like, you can use any technology in any language on any platform that you possibly want. It's like, look, you need to solve this problem. We write Java here. I know you hate it, but that's what we write. And look, we're in AWS. Okay, but there's a lot of freedom of decision within, you have to write it in Java on AWS, and this is the problem definition that you're trying to solve. And you can be very creative within that. So don't be afraid to give people constraints, thinking that you're not going to get any creativity out of them, because actually I think a lot of people really become more creative when they're given constraints.
Hi there. I have not read the book, but it's on my Amazon list. I was curious, most of this talk was about a manager with a direct team, or maybe 1 or 2 teams. I'm curious if you were to like kind of give the talk as a manager of managers or a director or some sort of slight, like 1 level higher up, what would be different kind of on the big picture overview?
So, okay, so what would be different? Very little, actually. So you do a little bit less direct hands-on debugging of teams, but you do a lot more debugging of organizations, which is a similar but even more abstract. It's just like you add abstraction to it. So when you're figuring out what's wrong, you're asking yourself like, what are the ways that this organization is not performing well, and how do we focus the organization, change the culture, whatever, hire in the right people, whatever it is that we need to make this overall org perform better. I think that, so the debugging becomes a little bit more abstracted, but you are still really looking at people, process, and technology as part of that process. I think empathy is empathy. It goes forever. I don't actually think that changes all that much. And then I personally still think technical judgment is one of the critical things. What I would say is, at least my current role, the way that I execute technical judgment is that I'm definitely like an architect type by mentality. That's what I'm interested in. Distributed systems and architecture are kind of the things that I'm very interested in. And so when I have to exercise technical judgment, it's is the way we are approaching the fundamentals of solving this problem helping this overall organization move towards a longer term goal from a technical perspective? And where are we applying the right technologies to move towards that longer term goal? So I'm doing a big public cloud push myself and my organization. And one of the things that I am working with my whole organization to think about is, we aren't a company that necessarily always writes code in a cloud native style. So what are some technologies and techniques and projects that we can prioritize that are going to move us towards that cloud native way of thinking about software development without having to impose it upon the whole organization top down? But that's where the technical judgment of how do I'm prioritizing things that are technical decisions that are leading us towards the strategic direction that I believe we want to go. So it's really just a level of abstraction. But I really think all of those things apply pretty well. And I do think, I think people still like to work for me because I'm still pretty technical and that they appreciate that.
Thank you.
We have a
remote question. This is from Jonavi in San Francisco, and she says, "Hi Camille, thanks for the talk. What are your thoughts about hiring managers from outside versus promoting internally? How should a company balance welcoming outside ideas versus retaining talent who want to move to management?"
Yes, so this is a hard one. I think some companies are really hesitant to hire externally, and I think that is a mistake. I do think there are, if you have a team where nobody really knows how to manage, nobody knows what they're doing, it's very hard to bootstrap that and teach yourself how to do it. And I think there are a lot of examples of companies that have really struggled to scale because they really were very much like, we can't possibly hire worthless managers into this company. They're just going to drag our culture down. And, the result was they just really were very inefficient for a long time. You can get outside expertise, you can get, advisors or whatever to come in, and that can be one way around hiring outside managers. But, it's very hard to bootstrap management if you don't have anyone who knows how to do it. And this kind of actually scales to some extent. Like, there are times when you have a lot of people who want to manage and you want to give people management opportunities, but you are lacking depth of bench in the more senior levels. And that means you're lacking people to teach those people at the more senior levels how to be effective managers at the more senior levels. So I think it's a balancing act. You really need to, you don't want to just hire external managers. That's demoralizing to your team. And you've probably got great people who could do a good job, but they're going to need coaching. You're going to need to teach them. And so you need to decide how much bandwidth you have and how many good managers you already have to do that teaching and do that coaching, and do as much teaching and coaching as you can, and hire advisors and hire, whatever, give them outside resources. But then don't be afraid to hire some, people who you think are good, who really match the culture of your company to contribute to, building a better management culture.
Hi,
Great talk. So do you have any, so for people first making the transition from senior IC or tech lead to manager, do you find that there's common things or common mistakes that are first made or things that are overlooked? And do you have any advice or things that you would suggest to kind of keep an eye out or prioritize, especially in those early days when you first kind of made that transition?
Yes, so people who are moving from tech lead to manager, first-time manager, I think there are a lot of common things. Not knowing how to do one-on-ones is like a pretty obvious one. I actually had no idea. The first time I managed was not at Rent the Runway, and I'm sure I did one-on-ones, but I remember going to them and being like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to say in these, and having a lot of like staring at someone across the table and just being like, I don't know, how's it going? How's the project going? Or, you know, a more common failing is just like, all we do is talk about the projects. You know, we never talk about your career. We never talk about the kind of, you know, the more career-based management stuff. And so that's a pretty common one. I think other common things are really, so a very, very common problem of new managers, and this goes for kind of a long time, is that they default into doing the thing that they're good at when they feel uncomfortable, and that is writing code usually. So it's like, I feel uncomfortable. This project isn't going as well as I think it should be. I'm going to write code and fix it. And not, I'm going to figure out why this project isn't going that well and fix the process or, you know, coach the team or what have you to make them able to handle it independently. And this is like I see product managers who come from engineering do this too, right? There's like, stop writing code, you're a product manager now, and the engineering team should be doing that. And when you keep writing code for them, you're just like, you know, doing the wrong thing, but you're doing the thing that's easy for you and it's kind of fun and you kind of miss doing it. And I get it. It's the same thing with managers, but you've got to stop going back to that comfort zone, you know, just because that's where you like to be. Those are two pretty common ones. There's a lot of other like more subtle things, but those are pretty common.
Cool, thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
The question I had was around a point that you brought up where you said that we are not, as an industry, really good at interviewing for technical judgment. I'm curious, like, you've probably been in a lot of interviews where you're actually, like, it's your job to assess somebody's technical judgment. I'm curious if you, like, what are some of the tips that you use, or what are the techniques you use when you're trying to assess people?
No, I will actually be honest with you. I don't think I have a very good answer to this yet. So I am very good at interviewing managers. I have become, like, the expert at it. I take very detailed notes. I have a bunch of questions that I ask that are around, like, certain kinds of challenges, certain kinds of ways that they do decision-making and balance things. I've gotten pretty good at it with managers. I have not had to do enough technical interviewing in depth in a while to feel like I have a good answer to that question. I will say that, like, I saw interview feedback recently that accidentally hit on that, where it was someone gave an interview to a fairly senior candidate and asked them how they might think about an architecture for solving a problem that they were currently trying to solve on their team. And the candidate gave a really good answer that broke the problem down into, you know, a bunch of like sensible components and was kind of able to defend why they chose maybe a less scalable component for that version versus like, you know, the ultimate scaling. And the person who gave the interview was really impressive. It was like, wow, you know, this is, granted the team who's been working on this is, you know, is more junior, but like this is a really good, you know, this is the kind of design that my team has been working on for a while, and I'm very impressed that they came up with this fairly quickly. And, you know, I do think that there is an element of design that you can get some degree of technical judgment. I think also there's an element of like digging in really deep on work that people have done and why they made the decisions that they made, and why do they have that self-awareness as to like what decisions were good, what things just went poorly. Like, oh man, I never should have made those early services around the runway restful, or RPC like. That was just like me not having any idea what I was doing on that stuff, and like, whoops, well, you know, you live, you learn, right? Like, you know, and just sort of being able to identify flaws in judgment from the past and what you learn from them. I think that's some of them.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. I have two questions. One is, follow up to the question before, is how do you have any suggestion for effective one-on-one as manager? Second is, what kind of performance evaluation system do you deploy in the company? How's that different from Google's OKR systems?
Okay. So on effective one-on-ones, I have a whole part of my book about that you can read, and I will, like, the highlight is the most important part of one-on-ones is do them regularly, ideally every week, at least every other week. Don't always talk about project stuff. Leave room to talk about the team, to talk about their career, to check in on, to talk about them as a human being, ask them how their lives are. Like, you don't have to pry, but taking the time to make a human connection with people is part of what you do in a one-on-one. And that's not something that was obvious to me when I first started. I'm pretty sure Mike Fisher had to teach me some of that. So, you know, I think there are a lot of different, like, people do one-on-ones different ways. Some people are very formulaic. They have like a set of questions and the cadence that they ask. I am actually very much a choose your own adventure one-on-one. I really let my directs kind of guide it themselves. I will bring some topics, but for the most part, well, you know, I'm a fairly senior manager, so I expect my managers to come to me and have things prepared, and I let them kind of guide the conversation as much as possible. But I think that doesn't work as well with you know, earlier career when you're managing ICs, and so it helps to come prepared and just, you know, keep yourself to a cadence of, it's been a couple months. Have we talked about their goals? Have we talked about if they're going to be promoted, or if they want to get promoted, like their progress towards that promotion, things like that. Performance management, OKRs. OKRs are good. OKRs is a big topic. It's a little bit distinct from performance management, because performance management is both about achieving goals, the manner in which you achieve the goals, the way you worked with the people that you achieved the goals with. So performance management is more than just, did I achieve these goals or not? Like, we're not, you know, we're not salespeople meeting a quota, right? We're engineering is a team sport, and so performance management requires more than OKRs. OKRs are useful for goal setting, and for making sure that you've got pretty specific, measurable goals that you're marking against. And you know, it has all the good and bad of goal setting, right? Good that you've got measurable things if you do it. Bad, it takes a long time, and sometimes those goals become outdated 3 months after you write them. And that depends on the size of your company. If you're at a startup, it's hard to write goals for a year because, you know, things change really fast. Whereas at the company that I work for, we actually can write yearly OKRs, and for the most part, get pretty close to hitting a lot of them. So.
Sorry, I do want to. I'm a new manager, and one of the things that I found challenging is when I ask my direct reports for when I follow up on things, it may seem like I'm nagging them. So there is this mommy factor that I've been warned against. So any tips on how to break that pattern or not feel like that?
Yes. Being a mom in tech, being an actual mom in tech, personally, when I first started managing a lot, I was pregnant and then with a very small child also. So that really contributed all to the momness of it. So I have a lot of sympathy for being in that position. I do think there's a level of, so what you don't want people to do is get comfortable that it is your job to ask them for status updates all the time. Like, it is their job to do their job and get you that information. And I think there's a degree of, if they're not pushing that information to you, they need to hear from you, hey, like, I expect you to, whatever, update the Jira ticket or drop me a note or, you know, whatever. We have these biweekly updates. They need to be done. If I have to keep nagging you about this, you're not doing your job. And I don't want to be nagging you. This is not a thing that I like doing or that I enjoy. And so making it very clear that this is their job to, you know, at whatever cadence. And it's okay for you to have to remind them occasionally. But if you actually find yourself in the role of nagging, then I think either they're not doing their job, or maybe you have a process problem where you actually just need to make a process that makes it easy for that information to get out, possibly beyond yourself, possibly to the whole group, whether it's stand up or, you know, some other manner. But it's very fair to like say, like, this is what I expect of you as my employee, as a person who's working on this project, whatever. So I shouldn't have to tell you over and over and over again, right? That's kind of the best advice I have there. It is very frustrating, and I have definitely fallen back into situations where I felt the need to nag. Is sometimes, you know, there are just things that people don't want to do, and that's the other thing, is like when people have to be reminded a lot of times about something, it is a sign that they may not want to do it. And sometimes it's worth asking yourself, is this a thing that they need to do? Is this a thing that they themselves need to do, or that someone else who might be better at doing it and want to do it more should be doing? Like sometimes when you're having to bug someone about something that they're not giving to you, it's actually just a sign that you've asked the wrong person to do it, or you know, that you're expecting something from someone that they're not going to be able to give you. And that frames a lot of things. That can frame where their career is going to go. But, you know, that's such is life, right?
So we're going to take one last question here in Brooklyn.
It's a lot of responsibility. Hi. Thanks so much for the talk. I'm an engineering manager, and I had worked my way up from being an engineer into engineering management, and I've done that. I mean, I did that once, and I feel like in that situation particularly, like I had a lot of, I mean, I feel like I could take for granted technical credibility and trust of the engineers that reported to me. So I've recently transitioned into a new role at a new company, and so I am this sort of external manager. And I'm curious what advice you have to somebody who is transitioning into a new role in terms of like how to gain that sort of stuff that I think came naturally in the previous role.
Yeah. So there's a few things. The first thing is to not act too rashly. So it can be tempting to be like immediately, it should be immediately trying to prove your technical credibility to people. And that can actually backfire and make you look much less credible. So when you don't have enough time, to have gathered the context of the organization and the decisions and why the decisions were made in the past and, you know, whatever, what the stack is, whatever, and you go and you say, well, why are you doing this? Why are you using Java? We should be using Scala or whatever. I'm sure you're not going to do anything like that, but it's very easy to come off as kind of a little out of touch, a little bit clueless, because you haven't taken the time to appreciate how the team got there in the first place. I would say that, you know, asking smart questions goes a long, long way. And asking someone to come in and, like, you know, sit at a whiteboard and just be like, can you explain the architecture of the system to me? You'll learn a lot. And if you ask smart questions, they will respect you. Like, it's actually just having them explain something to you and having you ask questions about what's unclear or why certain decisions were made. If you ask good questions there, people are going to be like, oh, yeah, he gets it. No problem, right? You don't have to get every single detail or know the whole history of the system necessarily. Just start showing that you get it, that you appreciate what they've done, that you kind of understand, you know, maybe why they are in the place where they are. I think then, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would say. I think if there are, and the final thing I would say is if there are clear areas where you do have unique external experience that the team is just completely lacking. So one of the things that I brought into my current organization was an operability review, which actually some Etsiers kind of gave me some ideas about how to do a good operability reviews. I know Etsy has done them, does them all the time. And that was not something that we had done before. And, you know, this setting up this process and starting to run my teams through, you know, hey, like, what's the run books look like? What does this look like? What does that look like? Have we done architecture review if we need to? Have we had the product manager look at it? You know, just having that process and setting that process up, which was something that nobody had brought into the team at all yet, and I was able to bring in, also helped us sort of establish that, oh yes, like this is a valuable thing for the team, and I think they enjoyed it. I learned a lot running them. They learned a lot preparing for them, and we all kind of taught one another. I taught people the value of doing operability reviews at all, and they taught me about their systems in the process. So I think when you identify gaping areas like that, which most teams have something, and it's usually in the operational or process side, actually is my personal experience, bringing in to fill those gaps can make a big difference and can really impress. I think, you know, just really show that you're like a credible person who takes these things seriously and has experience.
So as usual, every time I hear Camille speak, not only am I entertained, but I learned something. So if you have time, please join us in the lobby for some drinks. And Camille, thank you so much for such a great talk.
Thank you.